Well, I'm a little bit excited because I actually get to use PowerPoint, which I haven't done forever. So I thought, wow, this is going well. The first thing that we're going to discuss today is really just about web reporting. It's utilizing SQL reporting services, which is part of the SQL Server platform, both in the Express version, which is free, and also in the paid-for versions. There's really no difference between the two. You get the same functionality. A lot of the things that you're going to see me going through today, of course, I have full versions on some of the studios and some of the other applications. So it will look like there's a lot more features and functions. However, those don't have to do with reporting. So if you were to do and utilize the tools yourself, you might see something a little bit different, but that's just because it's limited to simply reporting. The first thing that we're going to discuss is really why SQL reporting services over Crystal Reports. Crystal Reports is embedded in MAS 500, and it really is a great product for the MAS 500 system. However, when it comes to reporting information, Crystal does require that you have a log into MAS 500 or an installation on the client. So with both of those requirements, it can become a little bit overhead hefty when you're trying to roll out reports to aspects or business units within your company that don't have access to MAS 500 for day-to-day processing. So the web reporting tool from SQL Reporting Services really doesn't have a client install. It just runs on a website, and it utilizes SQL and all the functions within SQL in order to provide reporting out to your business units. It utilizes the integrated security from Windows and is fairly straightforward in its setup. You click all the way through, answer enough questions, and then it will install the product. It's been in use now since SQL 2000, so it's about 8 years. And I have been actively utilizing it with my client base here for the last about 4 years. So right after I started with ISM. The topics that we're going to really do today is just pulling information from current MAS 500 reports. Where are those reports? How do I get to them? How do I figure out what the data is behind them? Next, we're going to actually create a simple sales report using the SQL Business Intelligence Development Studio, also known as BIDS or BIDS. And then we're going to do some setup on the website, the reports website. So this is going to be deploying reports and security. More information, of course, is out there and available online. This is a product that is widely used today. And so when you're doing development and even when you're deploying, you're going to find a lot of information is out there if you just Google your issue or question. So the one thing to note is that the product that you're going to look at is a lot more geeky than SQL. So if you don't look at it as something magical. I know us IT folks, we like to pretend like everything is just the most difficult thing to do, but a lot of it's just experience and knowledge, and it looks a lot more geeky than it is. But you can do a lot of geeky things. So hopefully I can put it into words that are easy for the standard user, which is what I was before I decided that I needed better reporting. Does anyone have any questions right off the bat? Anyone here and not going, what's a good way to say this? Anyone here to learn something? I want to make sure that the topics that we're covering are really going to answer the questions of the people that are here. And I do like feedback, so just provide it at random. No? Okay, so we'll get started. Within MAS 500 ERP, there are a couple bits of information. We're going to really start off in System Manager. So within System Manager now, within the 7.4 release of MAS 500, you now have a product called Schema Browser that's in the System Manager. This goes over the data structure of every module and the schema of those modules within MAS 500. This is really just displaying to you the information that you can access from MAS 500 through SQL, which is the backend. So if you launch the Explorer, it will come up and it will just give you a module name, and then it's going to give you the table names and descriptions, and you can click through and drill into information in order to sort of figure out where your data is at in MAS 500 and how you might get to it. There is some descriptions out there. I know that they're constantly updating the descriptions as Sage sort of moves over to this new interface. If you're using a version before this one, then you would see that it is that the Schema Browser is installed on your actual client workstation. It's a separate install, so it's on the actual disk. I don't think I have it on this version because it was limited to only 32-bit machines, and it did not like Windows 7. I can tell that much. So under Sage MAS 500 Utilities, right now I have only just this SMI, but if you're in a previous version, you should see something that says Schema Browser. If you don't, it is located on your MAS 500 7.3 and before disk. If you can't find it, you can just give us a quick call and just call support at ISM, and we can definitely get that over to you. Also, if I'm talking too fast or covering information too quickly, feel free to just sort of pipe in and say, could you talk about that again? I want to make sure that this is beneficial for all people on the call. So from Schema Browser, you really do have a list. Once you click on a table in the Schema Browser, it's going to show you these columns. And these are the data bits that are sitting out there waiting for you to use in your reports. And this can look like a big cluster to a lot of people. So what this is representing, I'm just going to click over here into SQL. So right now I'm in SQL Management Studio. So there's really 3 bits of information, I guess, that we should cover as far as what you use when you're generating reports. And anyone who's done Crystal reports is pretty much used to this. Number 1, you have the MAS 500 interface, which is something that you should utilize now that everything is sort of centralized into the application. So you can find a lot of information about MAS 500 in the application itself. Then we have SQL Management Studio, which is just a link to all of the data that is stored by MAS 500 and is retrievable by you. And for everyone who's not a data geek, all these little things, which are tables, are just like really big Excel documents. So nothing big or scary out there. And the last part that we utilize is really business bits, which is the Development Studio. Now mine of course says Visual Studio because I have, again, a full version, but if you were to access it, it would say Business Development Studio. All of those are stored. So this Business Development Studio and also the SQL Management Studio are installed from your SQL disk, and those are considered client tools. If you go through the setup, they're going to install just during the normal setup process and would be found on your system. So back over here in MAS 500, and if I'm moving around too much, just again pipe in. Back in MAS 500, we're at the Schema Browser, and we can sort of see that we have all the table names. Right now we're looking at just sales order, and then we have a ton of columns. And even that can be a little bit overwhelming. So where I always tell people to start is back here in System Manager. Underneath Maintenance is the Business Views and Context menus. What this is under each module we have this wonderful thing called Explorer. So under the Insights we have Explorer. And Explorer has all these little views of data like invoices if we're under accounts receivable, our customers, our salespeople. And all that information is actually linked to SQL views, which is just a SQL pull of data. So if you're curious what this view does, if you open up something like Invoices, and I believe I am not in the SOA company, so it's not going to return what I want. But let me go over here and switch to the SOA, which is just a temp company in MAS 500. I do have my own little version of data structures so that I can do some extra stuff for people that the SOA company doesn't cover. So I went to Accounts Receivable Module, Insights, and then I went to the Explorer, and now I'm going to click on just Invoices. And from this, you will get all the data that's sort of stored around invoices in the MAS 500 system. And if you'll notice, the information is sort of set up in a readable fashion. You have columns that make sense, like invoice, invoice amount, customer name here. And for those of you who have utilized the Explorer view, you do have the ability to add additional columns. So you have all these different columns that you can get. But MAS has pulled this data bit together in order to provide you a usable amount of information. And we can use this. So if we look here under Explore Invoices, we know that this is actually being pulled from over here on SQL. Somewhere on SQL, it is pulling together all the data that we need in order to pull in invoice information. So the best thing that we can do is actually figure out what it's pulling and how it's getting it. So back here in System Manager, we go into our maintenance, and we go into our Business Insight views, and we do a lookup. And we know that we were looking at something that had to do with customers. So we're just going to slip through here, and there it is, customer. And we're going to wait for this to load real quick. And we're going to see here that it says view name VDV customer. Now this is critical. So this information here that's located in the Business Insights views is our link between the data that's being presented to us in MAS 500 and what's stored on SQL, which is the cool part. So if I go over to, again, my SQL Server Management Studio, and I need to make sure that I'm in my right database. So again, this is meant to be a high-level view on SQL reporting. So if you have questions about this, you feel free to give me a call or to submit an email. I'm more than willing to walk people through the first few reports so that until they get used to it. But within SQL Management Studio, under the server that we're utilizing, under the database that we're in, is this little thing that says views. And notice this says view name here, and here it says views. So we're going to expand this views folder on our SQL database. Is everyone following so far, or are you guys all muted? Okay, so everyone's muted. It's weird. It's like talking to yourself. So
yeah, I think you're all on mute, but following good. Thanks.
I just like to check in, make sure that everyone hasn't dropped off because this is so much. So underneath, again, where I'm at is in SQL Management Studio. I've gone to the database that the server that I'm connected to, into the database, which is the connection that I have. And I've looked up, and now I'm looking for this thing called VDV Customer. So I'm just going to, I can scroll down and find VDV Customer. There it is. So I know that this view here corresponds to this information that was presented to me in MAS 500. And I can utilize this. So if I right-hand mouse click on it, I'm going to click select the top 1,000 rows. And all of a sudden, I'm going to get the information that I saw within MAS 500, in accounts receivable, under insights, and this customer's ones, or even invoices. You can pick that one up as well. But I'm going to get the information that was retrieved there, only I'm going to get it here in SQL. So here's all the data structure, all the relationships, all the information is sitting right here. One thing to note is that everything that is annotated with this VDV is a view within SQL, within MAS 500, that retrieves data that is presented towards an Explorer view. So if you don't want to go through the process of looking through all of MAS 500 to find something, you can just go under the views and look for VDV. Another thing that is not so straightforward is the VLU. This is a lookup view. This view is actually back here in MAS 500. It's not shown in any reports. But if I go into Maintain Customers, what? Oh, crumb cakes on rice. Serious? Of course I didn't authenticate my system. It just makes the presentation that much more entertaining, right? let me go into the company that I know that I have validated. And we're just going to use vendors because this company that I did do does not have any customers. When I click this little flashlight, it returns this information right here, vendor, vendor name, contact. In SQL, that information is actually VLU and vendor. So anytime you get data that gets returned to you in MAS 500 that looks like a grid, it's coming from a view in SQL that you can then access. Now, a cool thing about the management interface, SQL Management Studio, and this is really in the 2008 release, and you can actually have the 2008 release of Management Studio even though you may have a 2005 SQL Server. I'm going to assume that most people are not on SQL 2000. If you are, I feel sorry for you because this is a little bit more difficult than most. But if you're in SQL 2005 or 2008, and that's clearly seen when you go to launch the application itself, it'll tell you which SQL system you're using, then you're going to find that there are a few things that help you, and one of them is the filter function. So when I click on this filter views button, this little funnel appears, which is a filter, and I can say, hey, I want to only see information that contains VDV. I can click OK, and the system is now only going to retrieve information that is around this particular object. Hold on just one second. So as you can see, now that I've applied that filter, I can I'll only see the information that is starting VDV. So this makes it a little bit easier if you've got to go through and you just want to see what's out there. The other thing that you can do is you can actually see the information that created the view. So we're going to be using Invoice today in order to generate just a standard sales report by customer. I thought this was the most straightforward way to show off the product and sort of see how it works. And then what we'll do at the very end is we'll look at some more dynamic, stronger reports is a good way to put it, more difficult to produce. So if I look over here at VDB invoice, and that it would definitely correspond over here with our lookups. Let me close out these windows here in MAS 500. So if I went over here and I said, okay, great, I don't want to see this anymore. I want to see the one that was the invoice lookup. Again, you can sort of sort these grids any way that you'd like. I'm going to go up here, invoice. If I click on that one, I know because I've been using it that it's VDV invoice, but just to show you that indeed this correlates. VDV invoice here, VDV invoice here. If I right-hand mouse click and I go script this view as an alter to a new window, the system is going to provide an extraordinarily hairy amount of code that is difficult to use. But out here, if you parse this all out, are all these little joins. And it will actually show you all the tables that were joined in order to make this information. This is really something that I would say is a little bit more once you get into the advanced side of things. But for right now, to generate a report, the only thing that you really need to know is that all the information that you want to see in the invoice is there. We can also expand the view itself and the columns feature, and it will show you all the information that is displayed for you. So all this is actually all the data bits that's in there, and we're going to be looking really at invoice amount. We're going to be looking at customer name and customer ID, and that's pretty much it in order to generate the report. So you can either do the select and sort of see all the columns with the data to sort of make sure that you get it. And the next thing that you're going to do is you can expand the columns in order to see what information is contained in this view. And then, like I stated before, you can right-hand mouse click, do the select view, alter, and you can see how the tables are joined in order to present all this information to you. And again, that would be like a 3-hour seminar on what we should do when it comes to joins. One thing to note is that when you're in MAS 500, we all know that we can see down at the very bottom, we can see which company that we're in here, and we can click between the companies. When we're moving to data outside of that, we are really looking at all the data. And so if you look down here, there's always going to be a company ID, and I believe it was right here in this column, that tells us what company we're working with. So as we're generating reports, we just need to be aware that there's actually a company there that needs to be limited, or we're not going to be able to do anything, or we're going to basically get a ton of information for a ton of different companies. So is everyone clear so far? Is this really going at a speed that's acceptable? Okay, I'm going to say yes and move on. Okay, so what we would do, now what we're going to do is we know the data that we want. We want to create this report about our sales, and we want to do it on our invoice table because that's the table that contains the information that we need, basically the invoice amount and the customer. So once we know that's the information bit that we want to get, we're going to go in here into Visual Studio, and we're going to actually create a new project. So we're going to go in and we're going to click Project. Now again, I have a ton of things in here, but that's just because I am using a full version. You wouldn't see this. What is critical are there are two ways to generate reports. There's a project report wizard, and then there's just creating a project. I don't recommend using the wizard. It can be a little bit confusing. However, it is a great starting platform when you're just looking into how the product works itself. So I'm going to go ahead and use the wizard, although I certainly don't use it as much just because I've gotten used to sort of how information works. But the wizard is a great platform. It'll walk you through the steps of setting up your project, accessing your data, and generating just a very basic report without you having to know too much codey words behind it. So we're going to click this. Now, the one thing about SQL Management Studio and Visual Studio is when it goes to save information, if you don't look at this location, it'll store it in the most random place, like C, blah, 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 blah. It's this huge, long thing. I like to create a folder called My Projects that's up at right off of my home directory, just because it's easier to access after the fact. Now, with a project, know that really when you're creating reports within the Development Studio, a lot of times I generate my projects based off of the module or the business unit. So if I'm doing sales report for the sales people, I'll just call it sales reports. Because when I go to deploy all this information out to the website in order to generate the ability for people to view the information, it makes it easier if each project is sort of encapsulates either the reports that I want to deploy, so every single one of my sales reports or every single one of my vendor reports, or it encapsulates each one of my business units. So I'm a business unit fanatic, so I like putting people and groups all into a nice little pigeonhole and then shoving all my information around there. That way when someone calls me and I know that they're from the sales group and they say, this report, blah, 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 it's all underneath the sales group. So I always like to do the sales department. I know, a lot of information just to set up a folder. So once you start the wizard, it's going to take a little while as it goes through. Now we're coming down into security. So as we're going through the setup of this report, it's going to ask us information about how to access data on the SQL Server. There are two ways of doing this. We can define it and tell it how to access data, which is what I recommend. You can leave it as a Windows authentication, so the system will always try to connect to the server and to the data using the individual's login, or it can be their MAS 500 login. You can create a login for them for MAS 500 in MAS 500 that provides no access other than to the server. What I'm saying here is that for every single user in MAS 500, if I open up my nice little database, has this wonderful little thing called security, and if I click on users, you're going to see every single user for MAS 500 listed there. You will always see them. under the entire server, which is this next level up, under security, you'll see a replication of those logins. So there's 2 bits of information that's happening in SQL. There's number 1, can I get to the server? And number 2, can I get to the data in the database? And you get to control that. A lot of times what I tell people is go ahead and create a login called, report on me, or whatever you want to do, reports, so that you can control what information they're allowed to access. Again, this is a huge topic, but it makes it a little bit easier. What I always do is whatever you want. I'm going to just say best is the password. I'm not going to enforce any policies because I never want it to actually go out of line. And I'm going to tell it that, hey, I'm going to report off the MAS 500 database. So that's what I want to do. And I want them to have public information, and maybe I want sysadmin. Now, sysadmin is going to fall in line with the sysadmin group within MAS 500. So when you click this, it's going to be able to see all the data. But we're going to really control what data this can see by the information that we pull in the report. So just because we provide this access to our SQL server doesn't mean that this person is going to have full rights and get to whatever they want. We're still going to restrict that on the website. So in user mappings, we're just going to go over here real quick. User mappings, when we set up a login, is just simply which databases it can see. And now I can say, oops, I want it to see this database, and I want to have the application role, and I want to see this database, and I want to have the application role. And then I'm going to say, okay. So now I've created this new quick login called reports. It has access to the databases that I want, and now I can go back over here and I can say, listen, I'm going to create a new source. So data set, and you can call it whatever you want. I always call it MAS 500. So we get to use this over and over and over again. So there is no connection string, so we're going to click our little edit function, and it's going to say what server do you want to use. And you can either do a name server, you can do a lookup, you can do a period. A period just means a local server. Usually you're going to do a server name like, oh gosh, I want it to be, for me it's my computer. And I'm going to use that SQL login information that I just created called reports with the password best. And I'm going to save that password. And now when it pops up, I'm going to tell it which database I want to pull the information from. Then I can click the test connection, and it's going to tell me, yep, I can connect to that server. I can see that database. And I'm going to click OK. So it's saying, now I've got a new data source. That's why I use the little DS. And I'm connecting to the MAS 500 server, which is exactly what I told it here. And now I'm going to go next. And now it's going to say, what information do you want to put into this report? So I'm going to click the little query button. Am I going at a good rate of speed for everyone? Is everyone good?
Yeah, everything good.
Okay. For those of you guys who are SQL gurus, you're probably just like hunting and pecking. You're just waiting to do this yourself. So there are literally a ton of different panes in order to get information in and out of MAS 500. And if you look over here, we can add a group, we can add a table, and that's what we're going to do. So people who have used Access are probably used to this interface. So I'm going to actually add a table. Now I know it said table, but we're going for a view. Notice when I click the Add a Table button, it says, do you want to see a table? Do you want to see a view? Do you want to see a function? And of course, we want to see a view. Now we get to search. You can just type, so I'm going to go VDB invoice. And if you notice, the system sort of locks into that. I'm going to click Add that. So again, if you're used to Access, this is really falling in line with the entire methodology behind Access. So now I can look through and I can see which columns I want. Well, I want the customer ID, and I do want the customer name. And I do want that invoice amount because I am creating a sales report. And I do want to know the invoice date. That's always good information. When does it send out? But additionally, I want to see the post date. And of course, the one key thing that we always have to include is what company is actually being used. So I need to include the company ID. And anyone who's done crystal reports outside of MAS 500 for use by people who are actually just clicking on the crystal reports, this falls in line with that exact thing. So what you're going to notice here is the system actually created our select statement. Here it is, customer ID, customer name, invoice amount, invoice date, post date, company ID. Perfect. We're going to click OK. That's our information. We're going to click Next. Now it's going to say, what do you want to see? A table or a matrix? I know this seems confusing, but think of a table as just literally a list of information. It's primarily the report that you're going to use the most type. A matrix is an Excel pivot table, is the best way to describe it. It's going to take information, it's going to total it based off of a column. I always like using tables, but you can use matrices, and they definitely are helpful. So really, it's up to you how you want to do it. And now we're going to say, what are we going to do on the page? So again, if you notice, I'm just going to say, oh yeah, I do want this information, blah, 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 blah. I'm going to put that, display that on the page. I want the customer name. I'm going to group by customer, and their details are going to be invoice amount, but I'm also going to, and then I'm going to go next, and now I'm going to go finished. And now I get to name the report, so I'm going to report sales report. So at this point, the system has actually gone in here. It's created a data source. Now, if you're using Business Intelligence Server 2005, BIDS 2005, and you can always check using your help and about Visual Studio. Just know that Visual Studio 2005 is much different than 2008. Information is in different places. So as I'm going through this, just note that this is 2008, which I would highly recommend, and I would recommend that you install over 2005. The functions on the website are going to work the same. The interface is a little bit different. Information that we see here is our report data is actually over here in our solution is Explorer. Very difficult for me to get. I don't know why it was when they moved it from the right-hand side of the screen to the left-hand side of the screen. My blonde little brain just completely threw a loop and did not know what to do, but it did. It was sick and wrong. I was for sure that they had totally screwed me and gotten rid of my data sets. I was going to call. So right now we have our data set number 1 here that we created during the setup process. We have our source that we set up at the very beginning, and we have our report, which we can preview. And it just put in one name, and it shoved all the people in there because we said group by name. So you can sort of see that it just generated a really, really, really basic, simple report because we told it to. So now this is where it becomes fun, and we can do some additional stuff. I wanted to show you this because this is the easiest way of doing it. I'm going to actually delete this report. I like creating my reports from scratch, and so if you find that the interface works well for you, go for it. So there are some things that we need to do. Number 1, we need to put in some parameters. So we're going to go over here on our parameters. We're going to right-hand mouse click and click Add Parameter. And the first thing that we need is Company ID, because as we know, we need to have which company they want us to report on. Otherwise, we're going to get everything. Now, we can add values, which is totally available for you. It is a text value. It has available, or it has get values from query. And notice there's only one data set here. This is where the power of SQL reporting services starts to eclipse Crystal reports at a very high rate. And I wanted to show you this to begin with. So within our data sets, we're actually going to go in here. We're going to add a data set. And we're going to call this, I always like to do my parameters PM, and then I'm going to do Company ID. Now, I've used the shared data set, which you should always use. And now we're going to add fields, and we're going to do a query field. Now, the easiest way of actually doing this is going back over here to the query here. And let's go down here. go into our query designer, and now we're going to add our table again. Now we're using the exact same table, this VDV view, but now we're going to use something a little bit different. Hold on. Oh, VDV invoice. Come on. Oh, it's not wanting to do it for me, so we're going to have to select it manually. So this is where, if you're in SQL, you're going to really start to use some of the power of SQL knowledge. Here's our statement. If I click OK, our statement's going to come up here. Select company ID from VDV invoice. If I did this, it would generate a ton of lines because it would create a line for every single company ID in the entire database. That's not what I want. I just want all the companies that happen to be within that data set. So I'm going to use the word distinct, which says grant me, just find each unique instance of the company name within this. This is where we start seeing the difference between cursor reports and reporting services. Reporting services, our parameters that I'm going to start creating are completely based on the data that we're pulling from. So as that data changes and shifts, we're going to see that our parameters start to change and shift as well. So we're no longer going to have a ton of parameters that have information that is not relevant to the report being generated. Additionally, we are not going to have parameters that we have to update as data changes within our database. If we add a new company, this report would all of a sudden generate a whole nother company from the drop-down. As we add customers, the new customer shows up. So as we create these parameters and these looks into the reports that we have in MAS 500, we no longer have to support adding the additional information as things change over time. So for the SQL people, the nice thing is that everything is based off of SQL logic and theory. From a reporting aspect and a usability aspect, I don't have to go in and manage my reports to any extent as long as I utilize simple methodology, which is basically we don't want to hard code anything. So this is going to actually look at the view, the same information that we pulled for our reports, and show us every single company, which is great. So now when I go back up here to my parameters and I say add a parameter, and I'm going to select company ID. Oh, sorry, select company ID. And I go down to my available values, and I say get it from a query. I'm going to say get it from the parameter company ID. And the label, which is really what the system would display on our report when we say, you know, I am pulling all the sales records for company SOA, then it's going to actually show that. So the label is the information that's shown to the user. The value is the information that is passed to SQL to work. We can also specify a default value. We can add that in, which is what I'm going to do, or you can get it from your query. So if I say get it from my query, if I go down here, it's going to just, what ends up happening is it returns the first value. Since I know that I want it to be SOA, I'm going to say, listen, my default value, so when the report runs, return data immediately to the user, and this is the information that I want you to use. You do have some advanced functions, so it says automatically determine when to refresh, which is a great option because it utilizes SQL, and SQL will tell it when something has changed. Always refresh, never refresh. We never want to use never refresh. I don't know when you would use that. That's similar to Crystal reports going in, pulling in all the data from your parameters from a data set and then never refreshing it, which is what it does by default. Now I noticed that we're 40 minutes into this, and I think we'll finish our report in about 10 minutes. Is everyone okay so far? Any questions? Am I covering things too quickly? Just want to do a check-in. Okay, is anyone opposed if we run just a little bit too long? If you have to fall off, that's fine. I'll try to get through everything. I'm trying to be very conscientious of people's time, so if someone has to go, please let me know. So the other thing that we really want to be able to do in our report, we're going to really take three aspects. Number one, we need to know our company. The next thing we really need to do is we need to put in a date range. In my opinion, no sales report is good without a date range. I always put in two date ranges. I have my start date. Whoops. And of course I clicked too many things too quickly. I'm going to tell it, hey, it's a date time. Now this is another thing that's sort of cool. What's our default value? Well, I'm going to specify the default value. Well, what is it going to be? I can click this little function button here, and I can say, well, let's see, what are some built-in fields that are available for me today? Parameters, fields within different things. There's even data sets that are available. There are some really cool operators as well, but there are some constants. And so this is basically all the data that's behind the scenes that you can pull from. But you can pull from the execution time. You can pull from today's date. And that's really what I'm going to do, is I'm going to pull it from today's date. And I think it's right over here in date time. And there's a little function. And again, I know this obviously because I've been doing this, but it's available online. I'm just going to say, whoops, today. So by default, when this report runs, it's going to pull today's date and it's going to give it a start date. And now I want to have an end date. Now, in Crystal Reports, we had the function of a range. In reporting services, that function was removed because most people programming had to parse it. So I want a date from here to here. So if you're using a date range, you always will have two parameters, the start date and the end date. So again, this is the end date. We're going to go here and tell it it's a date time. Again, we're going to go back down to its default value. We're going to get it from a specific value. Whoops. We're going to get that from our common functions, date time, and then we're going to go into today. Now, know that there are additional functions in here which I've used before. This date add is a great function. So again, if you want to have it by default say start 3 months ago, we could say date add months minus 3, and the beginning date would be 3 months before. So if you have a default range that you want displayed to a user, you can do that. We're going to click OK. And the last thing I want to do is I just want to be able to select customers. So if you want to just look at a single customer, we're going to enter in just select customer. Again, this is a text field. You'll see Boolean, date time, integer, float. 9 times out of 10, it's going to be either a date range or it's a text. Now this is where we're going to actually do some fun things, and we're going to allow multiple values. And our available values are going to be the same thing as before. We're going to actually pull it from the data structure. Oops, and I should have set this up before. So we're going to over here add a new data set. We're going to use our embedded data set that we have. And we're going to go into our query designer. We're going to add that table, VDV invoices again. Come on. It added it twice. And we're going to go down here. Now this is where we can have some fun, because we can produce a little bit different information. So we can have the customer ID and the customer name. But like I said, because we're doing a parameter, we're always going to use the word distinct. So it only returns one option to the user. We never want it to return more. So we're going to go ahead and call this PM because it's a parameter data structure, and this is going to be our customer. Now I'm going to do one additional thing to our customer structure in order to make it more in line. And this is the idea of cascading parameters, which means as I select something, the information returned immediately gets restricted. And we're going to see this play out in both our data set, which is how we're going to utilize these parameters, and also within our parameters themselves. So we're going to go ahead and enter this customer parameter. We're going to allow multiple values. And our available values we're going to get from a query, and that query is going to be our customer query. And we're going to use the label field as a customer name. So the person's going to actually select a name, and that's how it's going to be. Now within our advanced, again, we want to make sure that it automatically determines when to refresh. We're like, okay, great, everything's specified there. We're going to click OK. So now we have our selection. So now we're going to bring it all together. And I know that we're going through this fairly quickly, but again, as you utilize the product, it's sort of cool. So really quick, we're going to go in here. We're going to now restrict our customer. So I'm just going to go and see the query of this. Here's my query. I'm going to say where, and let's just do it based off of the post date. Oops, undo. Where the post date is between, and we're going to do the start date and the end date, and we want to make sure that our company ID from the data sets equals the company that we've selected. So if you look here, this little asterisk, if you look up here, here's a little @ sign, and then I'm just using the names. Does this make sense so far? I know it's SQL speak. And now we're going to go into our data set, and we're going to actually adjust our query. So before we just had it blank, and we're going to now add that where statement, where company ID equals @ the company and the post date between the start date and the end date, and we want to make sure that our customer ID is in our customer. Again, this is a lot of SQL speak. I could speak to it forever, but it would just bore you. And if you have questions, I'm more than willing to go through how this query works and what's going on. Again, you can always test it. So it's going to say, well, what do we want to try? Well, SOA. And let's say the start date is the 1st of 2007, and the end date is the 31st of 2007 because SOA is back there. And the customer is, well, we can just leave that blank. But basically, it would be all. So it didn't bring any customers because I need to tell it what customers it needs to be in. So the first thing that you're going to select is the customer. Now, by default, we need to go into this little parameter. And we're going to do a get by query, and we're going to make sure that the system selects all the customers right off the bat. So what I'm saying is get all the customers from the data set as soon as it can run. And now we're going to actually generate our report. So really what we've done really quickly here is we've set up our parameters. We set up where our information is coming from. We set up what information is available. And now we're going to actually generate a report. So we're going to add a new report. And it says, do you want to do a report wizard? And I hate that wizard. So I'm going to do add new item. And it is a report. And I'm going to call this our customer sales report. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over here and I'm going to pull off this little toolbox. These are all the tools that you're ever going to need for any type of report. And I'm just going to pull in this table. And it's going to ask us, okay, what are you going to use? And we need to make sure that it knows that we're actually using the data source that's been embedded here. So we're going to actually tell it which data source to use. So DS, whoops, cancel. I'm going to go over here. rows. Nope. Sorry, I should have edited this one instead of creating that one, because then we have to bring over all that information. So everything we've set up is specific to the report. So I'm going to bring in this table. And now I can add the data. So I can say, okay, great. In my data set, I want my customer ID here. And then I want my invoice amount here. And that's pretty much it. That's all I need. Oh, wait, no, I want customer name. So I can go and delete columns and insert columns. All the normal things that you would normally do in Excel is available here. So here's my customer name. Now I want to do something. I want to group. And that's the cool thing, is that when you're in the system, you can add a group by right-hand mouse clicking. So the whole right-hand mouse click function is used quite often within reporting services. And we're going to, of course, just create a nice group. So we're going to add a group. It's going to be a parent group, and we're going to group by the customer ID. And we're going to add a group footer. So if you notice right here, when we click on this, here's this little thing that says grouping, and it's grouping by customer ID, and it's getting a total. So here's my totals. If we were to run this right now, the system is going to start parsing all of our stuff so we can sort of see what's going on. Notice that it populated our start date, populated our end date, and it has a select customer with nothing in it. Why? Because there's no data from here. So this is really seeing the power of this reporting tool, is that it's saying there are no sales for the 25th, so I'm not going to even give you any options. It's going to look blank. And there's so much that we can build in the back end, but I'm now going to change this to 01/01/2007, which I know is a valid date range. Then I'm going to go over here and notice immediately my select customer changed, and look at all those customers that I now have. Why? Because now I have data to report on. Now I can say view report, and it's going to start printing out every single one of the customers, and it's actually doing it in a matrix format. So again, we can go in here and we can say, okay, this grouping here, notice our grouping structure, we actually want to move this over, and we don't want to do it that way. So again, you could have the flexibility of creating reports in a plethora, a different way of adding groups, and a different way of deleting groups as well. So from this, we're going to delete a group, delete groups and related rows. Okay, so that we have a customer. We're going to go back in here. We're going to delete this structure. And now we're going to insert. I'm going to move this data structure over. So the interface itself can be a little bit entertaining. You can sort of see that there's an aspect of your grouping structure here. If we click on this, we went by invoice amount. And now we want to add the customer ID. And now if we preview this again, the system will actually regenerate this for us. Again, it defaults our dates. 2007. And so now it's giving our customer ID, and it's sort of, you can sort of see that it's grouping this. And the funny thing is that you can actually move this stuff around. So once we create a group structure here, these columns and rows really become analogous to the system. So the other thing that I want to add is I want to add in the name. So again, within that group structure, I also want the customer ID. And now I want to total this, the rows. So I want to actually total all of the sales. The other thing that you can do in order to make this a little bit easier is you can go into the report properties. Hold on just one second. Right here. Oops, it is just not coming up for me. Tablets properties. And this is where we can sort of see some of our sorting and our grouping just in a visual interface. I hope this is making sense. I know the product is quite large, and that can be difficult to sort of toy around with. But again, over here we can say, okay, here's our invoice amount. Here's our customer ID. We're going to go ahead and remove these columns. We don't want to list we don't want to list a total here. And then we're going to click our preview. We're going to change our dates again in order to make them valid for the data restricted. And now here's each one, and it's being grouped out. Now this is a group going out by column, but you can sort of see what I'm doing here is that it's actually generating the report, and we're having it on. And I can actually restrict the report as well. And again, I could play a ton to get the report, instead of being column-based, to be row-based. That is a switch within. That would take a little bit of time. But you're sort of getting the gist of what the product does. So once you're done, you have your report completed the way that you want to see it. And again, that can take a little time. We're going to click Save here. Then you launch your website. And by default, the system generates it into this thing called Reports. So once you're here, this is really the website for displaying all the reports that you generated. So you can go in here and you can create a new folder. And you can call this your sales folder. We're going to click OK. Once that folder is generated, you'll have this little drop down, and now we can handle the security. So now we can go in and we can add people and add what they can do. So edit security item will allow us to see what is actually here. You can add a new role assignment. You can say, well, now I want, whatever my version is, Josh, and I want him to be able to just view the row. Yeah, I just want him to view it. So I want him to be able to browse, whatever that's going to be. Obviously, I'm already a user in the group, but I'm just showing that once you are ready to set up the reports and sort of move them out here into the system, you have the ability of actually generating these sales department folders and then restricting them to specific users. So if someone goes to the website, they don't even see financial reports because this is only the financial department, and the sales department is actually going to have all the sales department reports. So once I go into the sales department report, it's going to tell me there's no items, and I can say, well, I want to upload the item I just generated. I created this report out here called Sales Report. So again, this is why I sort of like things in my projects. And here are my sales department reports. And here's my actual sales department. In our world, it's called an RDL, a report definition. But I'm going to open that bad boy up, and I'm going to upload it. Now, once it's actually uploaded to the system, I have to tell it one additional bit of information. Because if I run this, which I'm going to do here, it's going to come up and it's going to tell me that it has a problem. I'm waiting. And basically nothing gets returned because it doesn't know where to get its data from. So it's not sure where to pull its information. So we're going to go down here and we're going to click our little Manage button. And we're going to say, okay, we need, oh wait, sorry. I clicked the wrong thing. We're going to go down here and we're going to click the, yep, there we go. Should be managed. Crud, the option's missing from it. You know what? Of course this happens when I'm showing this off. What I was expecting to see, and what you can sort of see over here on one of the ones that I had, is when I go into Manage, I should see this thing that says Data Sources, but it's not pulling it across, and I'm not quite sure why it didn't pull that up. Fortunately, only these type of things happen when you're actually doing a report. So let's do, make sure that I have all the processes. You know what? I'm not quite sure. I've not had it do this before. It should have asked me, basically it should say, I don't know where my data report is. I don't know where my data structure is. Let's try to delete this again. Upload file, new item, open, okay. Oh, you know what? I uploaded the wrong one. My apologies. And so it didn't have a data structure, so it didn't have it. So now if I click this, it should return an ugly error message. The other report was basically an empty structure. It had nothing there. So yeah, it's giving me this login name password. It doesn't know what to do. So I can go up here. I can go down to Manage. my data sources, and I'm going to say, oh, I want to browse out to this shared data source that is here for MAS 500, and I want to use that. And I'm going to click Apply. And then this is the one thing about this structure that I don't like, is that it doesn't tell you that it's saved, but it did. So now if I click Sales Department and I click on the sales report, it's going to run it by default. It's going to run it how we set it to do, so it gave us the date ranges. If we change this date range again to 2007, so a valid date range for the information, again, it's coming up with all of our customers. If I click View Report, it's going to view our very ugly report that we just created really quick here, giving us the total. And there's so much that you can do. So to show you really, once you get used to the product and you start utilizing what it can do, I'll show you some of the reports that I've been generating for customers. So let's just look at a cost of goods report. So this is something that's a little bit more robust. There's been a little bit more behind the scenes work on it. So again, you can sort of see that this report is having actuals. We have different columns, different naming structures, and we have formats that are displaying things in dollars and cents and whatnot. The last thing that I wanted to show that's basically with these reports is that when you're actually within the sales report itself, you can manage the security on that report too. So this little drop down here allows us to go into the security apparatus for this specific report. So again, you have this sort of function and ability to adjust every single report and make the security specific to your users and to your needs. But the nice thing is that if you notice, I just went out to the website and I started running the reports directly from the website as soon as I let it know where to pull its data. So anyone could do this, and once I share that website within my organization, all the individuals can actually get to that report. There's a lot more power behind this concerning processing options, caching, and snapshotting. All three of these are meant to provide speed. So if I only want my sales to be updated nightly, I can generate a report and say, okay, you're only going to refresh the data once a day, and it's going to be at night. And so when someone goes to run the report, it's going to run much faster because all the data that it needs has been cached or snapshotted at a specific point in time when you've told the system to do that. When we go into the snapshotting options, it's going to say, what do you want to do? How do you want to snapshot it? Do you want it to be done manually? Do you want to use a specific schedule? When do you want to use it? So there's a lot of high-level power. This is just a snapshot overview of the product itself, or to sort of make reporting faster and more accessible and utilize the infrastructure, especially in a Microsoft environment, that is already there and being used on a lot of different products. So that's pretty much everything that I had. What we did today is we started within MAS 500 looking at System Manager and our Schema Browser to find data. We then went into our maintenance to figure out where that data was being pulled from our SQL Server. We went into the Management Studio to sort of take a look at where our data was and to provide security so that we could get access to our data. And then we used the Business Development Studio in order to create a report that we then could deploy to the website. And I clicked the wrong website button here. Website setup is actually, as I stated, very point and click, install, install, install. When you get into some of the higher level stuff, I'm sure your IT staff can assist if they want something like SSL security or different, a different naming convention for where it's initially set up, which is reports. So all that fun stuff is sort of there. I know that this has been quick, and it's sort of interesting talking for an hour and not hearing anything. So I appreciate your time. Are there any questions? I didn't see anything pop up here in the chat window or anything like that. Does anyone have any questions? No?
I think it was a little plenty to digest in that amount of time. So
I know. I only have an hour, and I'm more than willing to continue and ask more questions if someone has specific issues, or they have a specific use case that they want to share, and I can definitely provide information. I know that this is a lunch and learn that I'm restricted to exactly an hour, and I ran over it by 6 minutes, so I do apologize. But if you have a specific question for me, I'm more than willing to answer it for you. No? Well, just be aware that there's a lot of reporting options that are available, that reporting services is not restricted to just MAS 500 data. It can pull in your sales logics data. It can pull data from any number of systems, correlating that back to MAS 500 for presentation to your users. And that it actually is fairly quick and simple to set up, and generating a report can be very fast. Keith, I have no questions. So anyone else have any other questions or comments? Okay.
I liked it. It's an interesting new tool.
For those of us who use it, I find it very, very much more user-friendly, especially for the SQL geeky of us. As I know, Becky, one thing that is that you can do is you can build absolutely everything within SQL first and then deploy afterwards. So you can build all your scripts, store procedures, views, and otherwise on SQL and then use them in the reporting structure. George or Jeff?
Yeah.
Do you guys have any questions? I know it was a lot to digest.
Yeah, I'm not even sure if I have, like, I don't even see, like, the Visual Studio or the SQL Business Development Studio on my installation.
Yeah, that is actually part. So again, if this is something that you want sort of a use case or you're interested in getting into, that the option for reporting services, the Management Studio and the Business Development Studio is on the SQL disk. So your IT individual can install it. It installs as a client, so it won't set up a new instance, but it allows you to connect to servers that are remotely available.
Okay.
I know it's a lot to go over, and it definitely gets into the geekier side of things, but it's a great tool. The one thing we didn't really touch bases is that you can, when you're running a report, and let me just click on this bad boy, everything is downloadable into PDF, Excel, TIFF, GIF, CSV, I mean pretty much any format that you want. So you're not restricted to just the web view.
Okay.
And you can do a lot of crazy stuff with it, lots of crazy stuff. So if you ever have a use for it, I've really pushed my clients towards this over Crystal Reports. I find that this is much easier to support, and I end up doing less work with them over the long run. I don't know if that's good for me as a consultant, but once I generate a report that really works and thinks like the business process that it's supporting, then I really don't have to go back because the data refreshes itself, it changes, and you can actually have I have certain reports for clients where it's one report that provides their balance sheet, their income statement, and they never switch off of the same page. They never change a report. It's that flexible.
Huh. That's interesting.
It's very cool. And I like talking about it, you know. You put a geek in front of a computer, holy crap, you can barely shut them up.
Yeah, it looks like something I'd be. I mean, I use Crystal
But
Reports
if you
a lot.
are looking for reporting, yeah, and the nice thing that you'll find, and this is Jeff, right? I want to make sure.
Yep.
You'll find once you get into this off of Crystal Reports, it took me about 6 months, honestly, to transition.
Mm-hmm.
The nested parameters and the ability to refresh the parameter data was my biggest change. I don't know if you've run into that issue, but doing like what we did here where I can basically say, well, if the date range is the 1st through the 31st, 31st, 2007. Then when they go to select a customer, the customer range is extremely small. So having those data-driven parameters that's only returning the information relevant to the query being run is where it started benefiting me because I just didn't have to support all those. And it runs so much faster, and I don't have to install Crystal on every single workstation. I can just tell them to go to a website.
Yeah, that's what I've been looking for something for my financial statements because I basically take a crystal report and dump all my GL totals into a spreadsheet, and I got this spreadsheet that's just unbelievable with links and lookups and stuff, and I can do what you're talking about here. I mean, I can click on a thing and change it to this month, and it'll give me that month. I can click on something, change it to this location, it'll give me this location, but the spreadsheet's getting to where it's slow to react. You try to change anything, and it takes several seconds to update every time it goes to do it because there's lookups and indirects and all kinds of stuff in it.
Oh yeah, no kidding. And know that in this business where we generated these parameters and we said, okay, they're a lookup. Once you create a report, let's say you create your perfect income statement report that includes all the sort of varying aspects that you look at. But now when I give it to my engineering group, I only want their department to be seen. So I'm going to start limiting that accounting number to them. I can just copy this report just with a copy paste. I go over here, I hit copy, and then I paste it. And then with this copy one, I go over here and I say, okay, I'm going to take this parameter up here that that before was everything, and I'm going to say it's available to a specific value, and I'm going to say you can only see this. Then I upload that to my website, and now that report is limited to just those things. So I always build these big reports that have every single one of my parameters, and then I start limiting those parameters. So when someone goes to run the report on the website, it doesn't even ask them the question. It just says, this is what you're getting.
All right. So the website as well, is that something that you set up off of the SQL disk as well, or is that?
Yep, absolutely. Okay. By default, it usually installs. It's just not configured. So if your IT group can go in there and they'll see the SQL R2, and then they have this configuration tool. Usually they'll have this little option here that says Reporting Services Configuration Manager, and that is really the impetus for the product. So it will do the installation. But this is very, very quick. And I know that in a cost-centric environment that can be very difficult to try new technology. So if you are finding that you want to sort of explore whether or not this would work for you, I have absolutely no problem taking my time to sort of walk you through this product and get a report set up. And again, that would be at no cost to you, but it sort of lets you know that there's some benefits to having MAS 500 and its open architecture in the data structure. And although I can speak geek, I swear to God, I can really. I'm a good consultant. I can understand your world, and we can generate some reports off of your crystal reports, even just one that gives you sort of a step into this environment and maybe something that you can utilize. So if you feel that that would be beneficial, feel free to send me an email, and I have no problem giving you a couple hours to just sort of get you through setting it up, creating your first report, making it look pretty.
Okay. Yeah, as I pretty much do most of it. I mean, I do have an IT guy here, but he doesn't really do much with MAS 500 at all. I've pretty much been the one who's been working with Stuart at ISAM as far as getting things set up and all that, and I'm pretty much a geek at heart too. So
yeah, trust me, it's totally entertaining.
I learn it all, whatever I can, and make it work. I pretty much learned crystal reports by myself, and I actually use crystal reports a lot with our point of sale stuff, which is FoxPro database. I use a lot with that, and then I went into starting to using it more with MAS 500. I figured out I could do more with it than what was built into MAS 500. And
so have you done any work with SQL, like writing queries yourself?
Very little.
Okay.
I'm really starting to try and in my spare time find more time to learn more about it and get it a little bit more. I've done a little bit with it, and I've done programming in the past and a lot of little things, so I understand the logic of everything. It's just a matter of figuring it out and getting going with it. So.
Yeah, it's one of those things that you quickly find, especially after about, honestly, maybe a month, you'll find that you understand the structure of the language itself, because it is really around this idea of a select I mean, everything you
Yeah,
do
it
is a select statement.
looks pretty simple. Yeah, I mean, it looks like it
And
doesn't take
then-
much to get it.
Yeah, no, not really. And the thing is that there's so many tricks of the trade, but Google is a great resource. So
Right.
again, if you are wanting to maybe explore this as an option to maybe make your reporting a little bit easier for yourself, feel free to drop me a line and we can set up some time, just the two of us, and I can.
Sure.
Where are you at? Where are you located?
Tucson.
Of course. Gotta love you Arizonians.
Yeah.
Why can't you come to beautiful San Diego? It's pretty.
Yeah.
But we could do a session and really just, if your IT person is willing, we could set up the website on the server. We could take a look at the report that you've generated so far and how it works. And then I would be more than willing to sort of walk you through that process with you driving and me just sort of saying, okay, this is what we're going to do next.
Okay.
So again, it's one of those things, my joy in consulting comes from having something that actually benefits you.
Yeah,
That's the only reason why I do this. So.
Yeah, I definitely have some interest in it. I'll have to see when I'll have some time.
It's the worst part.
This month's about over, but maybe latter half of next month, maybe I'll have.
Completely at your disposal. This is just information so that you know that's out there. And that's the same to Keith and George if you guys are still on the line. If there's something that you see that you feel like this might be a tool that you could use and you really want to test the waters to see if there's something, if this will really work for you, just know that I'm more than willing to walk you through that process so that we can even do that sort of test case to make sure that this is a solution that will work. Because I know it's very difficult, especially with the current economy, to make investments in things that we're not quite sure are going to work out. And so I really like the product. I really like sort of how ISM has positioned itself as a partner with their clients, and I'm willing to do some of those test cases in order to show that we do have some solutions here that can benefit you.
Yeah, I like the idea of being able to do them on the website, because right now most of the stuff we're doing, once the financial statements are done, I'm like, pumping them out on paper, and it's a pain to
Killing
print
a
off.
few trees.
Yeah.
I love the fact that I'm like, someone says, oh, can we do this? And I'm like, just go to the web page.
Yeah.
It just, and you do. You end up geeking out because, as I'm sure within Crystal and all your little functions, and you can do it in this product too. You can geek too. This one just has a web page, which makes you look more austere.
Right.